I'm going to compare the Razer Kiyo Pro to the original Razer Kiyo, the Logitech Brio, and the Logitech Streamcam. I'll go over the specs, price, build quality, microphone quality, image quality, and then give my verdict on which webcam is the best purchase depending on your use case. Specifications. The Razer Kiyo Pro records at up to 1080p 60 frames per second, and it uses a USB 3.0 connection. It has an adjustable field of view listed as going from 80 degrees to 90 degrees to 103 degrees, but I'm definitely going to challenge that in this review. As for video formats, the Kiyo Pro supports NV12 and YUY2 at 1080p 60 frames per second, which should drastically improve the colors. And this is actually the first webcam that I've ever seen be able to do YUY2 and NV12 at 1080p 60 frames per second. It might be the first one to ever do it, and we'll get more into video formats later. This also has HDR support, high dynamic range. Now, it's not like you can get like an actual like HDR video file. Like Razer doesn't come with a program that you can like record HDR footage with it. And the color space is still Rec 709 instead of BT 2020, which is what you would get if you recorded like an actual HDR file with like an HDR capture card. But the HDR is still pretty useful, and I'll talk about that in the image quality section. The Razer Kiyo, the original, records in up to 1080p 30 frames per second and 720p 60 frames per second. It uses a USB 2.0 connection. It has an 81.6 degree field of view, and this records at MJPEG unless you drop it all the way down to 480p, and then it can do YUY2, but 480p. The Logitech Brio records at up to 4K 30 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second. It uses a USB 3.0 connection. It has a field of view that's adjustable from between 65 degrees, 78 degrees, and 90 degrees. It only records at MJPEG at 4K 30 frames per second and 1080p 60 frames per second, but if you drop it down to 1080 30, it can do NV12 and YUY2. Now, the Brio is also marketed as having HDR, but in my experience, this is just like a label because toggling HDR on and off in the software didn't do anything for me. So the Logitech Streamcam records at up to 1080p 60 frames per second, also uses a USB 3.0 connection, but this one, unlike the others that have a Type A end at the end that you plug into your computer, this one, the end is Type C. Now, you can get an adapter for this, and I got one, which I've used for a whole year, and it hasn't given me any problems, but the Streamcam itself has been kind of buggy, so I'll talk a little bit about that. The Streamcam has a 78 degree field of view, and it records in MJPEG at 1080p 60 frames per second or NV12 YUY2 at 1080p 30 frames per second. Now, as for the prices, I bought my Razer Kiyo Pro for $200, the Razer Kiyo for $100, Logitech Brio for $150, and the Logitech Streamcam for $170. Now, I got all of these at their launch prices, except for the Brio, which actually I think launched at $200, but I ended up getting it for $150. But as you've all seen, prices of webcams fluctuate drastically. So if you want current prices on all of these devices, I have linked to all four of them in the description below. Now let's get into build quality. The body of all four of these devices is sufficiently sturdy. The Kiyo comes with a ring light that you can twist to adjust the brightness, but unfortunately, it's not very bright, and the light isn't very soft since the ring is so small, so it's more like a beam that shoots onto you to give you kind of harsh light. So it's not that useful in most situations, but in super low light settings, it actually can come in handy. The Razer Kiyo Pro comes with a privacy cover, which is like a cap that you just put onto the webcam and covers it up completely. The problem is it's just a cap, so it's easy to lose. The Razer Kiyo Pro's wire is 59 inches long, and it's very thick and it's braided. It's also detachable. The end that goes into the webcam itself is Type C, but the side that goes into your computer is Type A. The Razer Kiyo's wire is also 59 inches. It's braided, but it's thinner, and this one is non-detachable, and the side that goes into your computer is Type A. The Logitech Brio's wire is 85 inches, and it's detachable. It's the longest wire of these four webcams, and the side that goes into the webcam is Type C, and the other side is Type A. The Logitech Streamcam has a wire that's 60 inches, non-detachable, and the end is Type C. So the Brio's wire is the most convenient because it's the longest and it's detachable, so you can replace it. The Kiyo Pro's is also detachable, and the braiding is really thick, so it should be pretty durable, but I'll have to follow up on that, to be honest. All four devices have a monitor clip, so you can put them right onto a monitor, but also they all have a standard 1/4 inch tripod thread so that you can attach them to a tripod or like a ring light if it has one of those like ball mounts on it. To attach the Brio to a tripod though, you have to pull out the monitor clip, which I hate doing every time because it feels like it's gonna break and it's like making this creaky sound. I really don't like that. The Streamcam has two separate clips. One is for the monitor and then one's for the tripod, which has the thread at the bottom of it. And hopefully you don't lose either of these. Otherwise, get bent. You have to screw the entire device of the Razer Kiyo onto a tripod. The Razer Kiyo Pro, you can actually screw the entire thing with the monitor clip onto a tripod, or you can take the body, just the webcam itself, off of the monitor clip. You can screw that off and then screw it onto a tripod. So you have a lot of flexibility in regards to that. All four devices can be tilted up and down, but the Kiyo has the best range of motion by far, but only the Kiyo Pro can move freely left and right. So overall, I think the Kiyo Pro probably has the best overall build and design as far as positioning the device how you want it, but the Brio has the longest cable, which is a really big deal if you're using a desktop computer and your monitor or tripod isn't right next to it. Microphone audio quality. So here is sample footage of all four of the microphones. This is a microphone test sample audio from the Razer Kiyo Pro, built-in microphone, just hearing what it sounds like. Razer Kiyo Pro. This is sample audio from the Razer Kiyo, the original, and this is the built-in microphone, just hearing what it sounds like. This is the Razer Kiyo. Switching over once again now, this is the Logitech Brio. This is the built-in microphone, and this and the Streamcam also both have some noise cancellation, so we'll see, how that pans out. This is the Logitech Brio. Lastly, this is the built-in microphone test for the Logitech Streamcam. Just hearing what it sounds like, built-in microphone, right in the webcam, the Logitech Streamcam. Now, as far as retaining the fullness of your voice, the Kiyo Pro is the best microphone. The problem is the Kiyo Pro and the Kiyo have no noise cancellation. So my computer fan, which I can't turn off, is very loud in these two devices. The Kiyo overall just sounds okay, but the background noise is way too much. The Brio and Streamcam sound pretty tinny and echoey, but they have much better noise cancellation, so you don't really hear the fan at all. So none of these devices have good microphones, but I reviewed a few different microphones on this channel, like the Razer Siren Mini, which I'm using right here. And I'll definitely be reviewing a bunch more microphones in the near future. Now what you all have come here for, and I put this last intentionally because I know everyone dips after I show this, the image quality. I'm going to show a bunch of different examples with different lighting scenarios, different settings, automatic and manual, for the Razer Kiyo Pro, HDR on and off. And then I'll rank each device from 1 to 4 in terms of sharpness, color accuracy, dynamic range, autofocus, and field of view. So for this first set of tests, we're gonna do daylight only, fully automatic setting, the highest resolution, and then nighttime with an overhead light only and fully automatic settings, highest resolution again. So this is what you can expect each device to look like if you plug them directly into your computer and turn on OBS or Zoom without tweaking any of the settings and without studio lights. In the daytime, the Logitech Brio is able to produce the brightest image overall without overexposing the background. It's actually not that bright back there, but it's a white wall, so it reflects enough light so that the Streamcam gets pretty much destroyed by it. The Razer Kiyo has the opposite problem of the Streamcam. It just makes the whole image too dark. The Kiyo Pro actually looks similar to the original Kiyo, but the colors are a bit better, and it is actually the softest image of the four. The original Kiyo is sharper. As far as colors, the Kiyo Pro has a slight advantage over the other three, but aside from the Brio, all the images are trying to expose for the background, so I'm way too dark for the other webcams to really accurately represent color anyway. So out the box in daylight only, I think the Brio does the best overall, but it also comes at the cost of a lot of noise in the image, especially in the background. At nighttime and low light, the Brio again gives the brightest and most usable image. All three other webcams don't look good in low light. The image is really dark since it's trying to expose for the overhead light that's lighting the wall in the back. But this is where the Kiyo's built-in ring light is really useful. It doesn't help the image by a ton, but it puts it at about the same level as the Brio with that extra light. However, in ultra low light, where I'm just being lit by my monitors, the Kiyo Pro is the only shot worth using. But again, the original Kiyo still wins because with the ring light, you can turn that on and now it'll look better than the Kiyo Pro. Now, I don't know how common of a scenario this will be when you're using a webcam with all the lights off, but it's pretty cool. All right, let's optimize the image quality on all four of these devices by improving the lighting and tweaking the manual settings. And this gives me an opportunity to quickly talk about the software because that's how you'll be changing the settings. As for lighting, I'm using a bunch of lights in here, but the main lights that I'm using are the newer 18-inch advanced ring light and the Elgato ring light, and I have links to reviews of them both in the description. Now for the settings, first of all, once you plug these devices in, they immediately install the drivers so that you can use them in Zoom or OBS immediately. And once all the drivers install, you can control most of the settings using OBS. Even if you only want to use your webcam in Zoom, I highly recommend tweaking your webcam settings in OBS and then sending it to your video conferencing software with OBS Virtual Camera, and it will make your shot look way better. If you're using the latest version of OBS, you can just press OBS Virtual Cam, then go in Zoom and then use the OBS Virtual Camera. And if you need help getting the best webcam settings, I have a full guide on that. Now the Razer Kiyo and the Logitech Streamcam can be controlled fully in OBS, but there are a couple things that you can't change on the Brio and Kiyo Pro in OBS. So to change the Logitech Brio's field of view, you have to use Logitech Capture or Logitech G Hub. These can be downloaded separately from Elgato's website. And after you change the field of view, then close the program, because first of all, you can only use the webcam in one program at a time. Also, Logitech's programs give you limited control over the device, and some of the settings conflict with the settings that you set in OBS. The Razer Kiyo Pro requires Razer Synapse to change the field of view and to set the HDR on or off. And the Kiyo Pro will actually let you install Synapse as soon as you plug it in, so you don't have to go find the download on the internet. But again, I would try to use Razer Synapse as little as possible. I only use it to toggle the HDR on and off. It crashed several times on me and it's laggy, and the preview window is 4:3, which is insane. Also, when you change the field of view of the Razer Kiyo Pro to 90 degrees or 103 degrees, first of all, the listed 103 degrees is barely wider than the 90 degrees listed on the Brio. And you get a crazy fisheye when you do 90 or especially 103 degrees. So I wouldn't bother with going past narrow, unless you want to look like you're in a Beastie Boys music video. All right, now that the lighting and settings are optimized, let's look at some more footage. And of course, now I can show some HDR footage since I have Razer Synapse opened. So for these next shots, I'll show daytime, the highest resolution with studio lights and manual settings, and then nighttime, highest resolution with studio lights and manual settings. So here's daytime. HDR is off on the Razer Kiyo Pro for now. With manual settings and optimized lighting, the Brio still does the best in terms of sharpness, followed by the Kiyo and Streamcam, which are about tied. The Kiyo Pro pulls up the rear. The Kiyo Pro has the best colors overall. I actually had to look in the mirror and then look back at the image on the screen. I did one of those Leonardo DiCaprio points, because most webcams, like, they can get my skin kind of right, but like not really. This one did a really good job. The main weakness with the Kiyo Pro's colors is it does add a little bit too much orange to everything, and you can't really take that out even when you change the white balance. The Kiyo is too yellow. You can try to drag the white balance, but then it'll make everything blue. And the Streamcam and the Brio are too red. And you can see that on my skin tone. You can also see it with the microphone, which is really like a bubblegum pink. And now if you have one of these neon Nintendo Switches, I think none of these really can get it quite right, but the Kiyo Pro and the Kiyo both had too much orange on here, but there's like too much magenta on the Brio and the Streamcam. So they're both kind of lacking. The colors can be improved on the Brio and the Streamcam by dropping them down to 1080p 30 frames per second and using YUY2, but I'll show that a little later. So the colors don't look perfect on any of these, but I do give the edge to the Kiyo Pro. Now for the dynamic range, how well each webcam is able to display both bright and dark colors in the same shot. The Kiyo and the Streamcam both get overpowered by the sun, and the Kiyo is even at its lowest exposure setting, so I couldn't make this darker even if I wanted. The Brio and Kiyo Pro are about even here. You can still see the individual slits of light coming in from the blinds, but I'm still sufficiently bright. At nighttime with optimized settings and lighting, the results are similar, but now the background isn't reflecting the sun, so there's less intense light to deal with. Sharpness and color accuracy are the same as daytime, with the Kiyo Pro showing a little bit of an extra advantage, being able to show how faded my shirt is, and also the background doesn't have that same combination of both like reds and blue graininess trying to like battle each other like on the Streamcam and the Brio. It's more of like a uniform color. All four devices expose pretty well here, but the Brio is best at retaining detail with dark colors like my beanie, and you can see all the lint, even a small stain on it. And part of that is the good dynamic range from the camera when it comes to dark colors, and the other is just how sharp the Brio is. Alright, so this is about as good as each webcam is going to look at its highest resolution, but let's drop everything down a bit so we can change some more settings. So the Kiyo Pro I'll be showing with HDR on, which automatically produces a 1080p 30 frames per second image. For the Kiyo, I'll drop it down to 720 60 frames per second to see if the image is usable and if the frame rate to sharpness trade-off is worth it. For the Brio, I'll be showing a bit of 1080-60 for smoothness and then 1080-30 on YUY2 for the colors. And the Streamcam, I'll drop straight to 1080-30 YUY2 to improve the colors. So here are the results of this. Daytime first. Let's start with the Kiyo Pro. From what I heard in Kit Guru's review of the Kiyo Pro, he talked to a rep from Razer who stated the way that HDR works is it uses a 60 frames per second recording, but it combines every other frame. So the first frame will be exposed for a bright light, and the second exposed for dark areas, and those two images would get stitched together into one frame. So the result is footage that's 30 frames per second. And in my testing, that seems accurate. The background looks just as natural as the Brio, but I'm overall much brighter and the shadows created by my hair aren't completely black. So the Kiyo Pro's HDR does its job. I don't think you get to see the true benefit of the HDR unless you actually have suboptimal lighting. So for example, if you're being lit from the back, so let's say that there's an open window behind you and that is your main light source, that's when you're really gonna see the HDR actually help out. This is actually the wrong way to light your shot. You should have your brightest light in front of you. But Razer's idea is most people are just gonna buy a webcam, plug it in, put it on their monitor wherever they happen to be, not buy any lights, not adjust their setup at all, and just start using it in Zoom calls. And when you turn the HDR on in that scenario with a really bright background, it gives you the only usable shot of all four of these webcams. Really, it's the only usable shot that I've ever got of any webcam with that type of lighting scenario. So the Razer Kiyo Pro's HDR is really cool and it does its job. The Brio's HDR, I haven't actually got to do anything, even though I've toggled it on and off in both Logitech softwares. So I think that's just a label on that device. Now, unfortunately, the HDR on the Razer Kiyo Pro does come with three major drawbacks. First of all, the image that was already very soft to begin with loses even more detail. In HDR, almost all my freckles have been airbrushed away. Secondly, the HDR is prone to artifacting. Basically, the image doesn't get processed very well and you get a bright splotch on the screen. Because of this, you have a very narrow range of exposure and gain that you can utilize. Anything outside that range will pretty much break the HDR, which ultimately means it limits how bright your image can get. Also, this artifacting still shows up when you have the exposure and gain inside the correct parameters whenever there is supposed to be motion blur. The third problem with HDR is the creation of an extra outline around objects. It's kind of this rainbow looking blurry outline. When you combine all these issues, you get an image that's, yeah, it's properly exposed, but with all the trade-offs degrading the shot, I don't think it's worth it. The good news is you don't need HDR with this webcam. It's not like the Streamcam and Kiyo that just get straight blasted by bright light. The sensor on the Kiyo Pro is actually pretty good. And if you adjust your gain and exposure properly, which I'm serious, it'll only take you like 2 minutes to learn and I have a guide on it, your image will still look well exposed, but it will be sharper and overall much better than if you use the HDR. Just don't use a blinding bright light behind you. Put it in front of you instead and you'll be fine. Now for the others. The Kiyo at 720p 60 frames per second looks pretty rough. The frame rate boost is definitely not worth the drop in quality. On the Logitech Brio 1080p 60 frames per second, the Brio loses its sharpness advantage and drops down to third place in that department. Now I'm all about 60 frames per second, but if you're getting a webcam for 1080p 60 frames per second, I think the Kiyo Pro has the Brio beat because now they're both about even on sharpness, but the Kiyo Pro has an advantage in colors, partially because it can do YUY2 at 1080-60. That said, if you have a decent computer, even if you're video conferencing to Zoom, which is maxed at 1080p, or streaming to Twitch, which is currently maxed at 1080p, you can still set the camera to 4K and either downscale that in your streaming settings or let Zoom downscale what it gets from OBS virtual camera. Just setting the Brio to 4K itself pushes out a way sharper and better image to OBS. Even if you're gonna downscale it later, it'll look better if you set the webcam to 4K. Now at 1080p 30 frames per second, the Brio now gets access to YUY2. This improves the colors drastically, even though it still can't quite get to the Kiyo Pro's level. There's more orange added to the image, but it doesn't go overboard like the Kiyo Pro. And the white wall looks more like a uniform white rather than that mix of extra red and blue together like there was before. The same is true for the Streamcam's colors at 1080p 30 frames per second on YUY2, but it still can't deal with the bright background at all. Honestly, the wall's really not that bright. That's just how it shows up on a camera with not so good dynamic range. For good measure, here's all the settings I just went over at nighttime as well. The main difference here is that all the devices are able to expose for the background better. On the Kiyo Pro, the HDR isn't really necessary at night, even though I have two lights lighting my background specifically. And now for my verdict. The Brio and Kiyo Pro are the front runners here. Which webcam is best for you is based on which attributes you find most important. So let's go down the list. If you want the sharpest video possible, let's say you're doing a lot of talking head videos, or you're doing streams with your face at full screen, or you're teaching with like a whiteboard and you need to show something, then the Brio is definitely the way to go in terms of sharpness. Now, let's say you want the best colors. Let's say you're doing makeup tutorials, or you just want your skin tone to be as accurate as you can get it. Then the Kiyo Pro does a pretty good job a lot of the time, but it does add way too much orange. So you might be better off getting the Streamcam or the Brio and then setting them to 1080-30 and YUY2, because I think those look a little bit more natural than the Kiyo Pro. When you get them at YUY2, they add some more orange back to the image, but they don't go over the top like the Kiyo Pro. If you're mostly getting these webcams for video conferencing and you can't really adjust your setup to add lights or, move around your backdrop, if you have a window behind you, something like that, then dynamic range is going to be really important. So the Brio and the Kiyo Pro both about even here, but if you have a really bright light behind you, then the Kiyo Pro is definitely the best for dynamic range, because you can set the HDR mode on. It's going to be a lot less sharp, and there are some weaknesses to it, but it's the only one that can give you a usable shot if you have your main light source behind you. But again, if you can rearrange your lighting at all, then you can eliminate the need for HDR for free. So Brio has probably some of the fastest autofocus here, but none of them are like amazing. So I would turn the autofocus off if you can. The field of view is the best on the Brio, so this is useful if you don't want that shot like super tight to your face, if you're gonna be like close up, especially if you're using this like on the laptop, or if you have like multiple people in the shot, which I don't know how common that is, but if you do, the Brio is really good for that. You can kind of like do that fisheye thing on the Kiyo Pro, but personally, I'm gonna stick with the Logitech Brio as my main webcam. I upload all my videos in 4K, and I do a lot of like capture card reviews that are in 4K, so I really like the sharpness here. And if I really need those more accurate colors, I can drop it down to 1080-30 and then put YUY2 on. And the Brio also does just as well as the Kiyo Pro in almost every lighting condition, except when you have a super bright light that's behind you. Links to all 4 of these webcams are in the description, and I'll see you in the next review.